The security guard's hand was already on Sarah's shoulder, ready to escort her out of the exclusive VIP section, when a voice cut through the noise like a blade. What happened next would make those pretentious socialites question everything they thought they knew about power and privilege. Sarah Martinez had always believed that hard work and kindness were the only currencies that mattered. Every morning at 6 sharp, she unlocked the doors to her small flower shop in downtown Portland, breathing in the sweet scent of roses and fresh eucalyptus. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her hands were permanently stained with soil, her nails short and practical, and her wardrobe consisted mostly of jeans and cotton shirts that could survive a day of arranging bouquets and watering plants. The shop wasn't much to look at from the outside, squeezed between a vintage bookstore and a coffee roastery, but inside it was Sarah's sanctuary. She knew every customer by name, remembered their preferences, and took genuine joy in creating arrangements that marked life's precious moments. Weddings, anniversaries, apologies, celebrations. Sarah's flowers had been part of them all. Her life was simple, predictable, and exactly how she liked it. She lived in a modest apartment above the shop, spending her evenings reading or tending to her personal garden on the small balcony. Money was tight, but she made ends meet, and more importantly, she found purpose in bringing beauty into other people's lives. That's why meeting David Chen had felt like stepping into someone else's fairy tale. She'd first noticed him on a rainy Thursday morning, standing outside her shop with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and he wore a simple gray sweater and jeans that looked expensive but understated. When he finally ended his call and stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket, Sarah felt her breath catch. "I need something for an apology," he'd said, his voice soft but carrying an authority that made her look up from the arrangement she was working on. "Something that says I'm sorry without being too dramatic." Sarah had smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "What kind of sorry are we talking about?" "Forgot to call sorry, or accidentally insulted your mother sorry." The corners of his mouth had lifted in a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made her heart do a small flip. More like completely forgot about dinner plans and left someone waiting at a restaurant sorry. That's definitely white roses with baby's breath territory," Sarah had said, moving toward her cooler. Classic, sincere, and humble. Not trying too hard, but definitely making an effort. As she'd worked, David had wandered around the small shop, commenting on different arrangements and asking questions about the flowers. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, curious about her work in a way that felt genuine rather than polite. When she'd finished the arrangement, he'd paid without looking at the price, leaving a tip that was more than generous but not so large as to feel patronizing. "Thank you," he'd said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "This is perfect." He'd returned the following week, then again a few days later. Sometimes he bought flowers, sometimes he just stopped by to chat. Sarah learned that he worked in business, though he was vague about the specifics, and that he'd recently moved to Portland from San Francisco. He asked about her flowers, her shop, her dreams, listening with an attention that made her feel like the most interesting person in the world. Their first official date had been coffee at the little place next door, stretching into lunch, then dinner, then a walk along the waterfront that lasted until the city lights reflected like stars in the river. David was easy to talk to, funny without trying too hard, and genuinely interested in her stories about difficult customers and successful arrangements. "You light up when you talk about your work," he'd observed as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. "It's beautiful to watch." "It's not glamorous," Sarah had replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Some people think flower shops are romantic, but mostly it's early mornings, sore feet, and trying to make peonies last longer than they want to." "The best things in life usually aren't glamorous," David had said quietly. "They're just real." 6 months later, when he'd asked her to move in with him, Sarah had been surprised by his apartment. It was beautiful, certainly, with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture, but it wasn't the kind of ostentatious display of wealth she might have expected from his neighborhood. It was comfortable, lived in, filled with books and plants that he actually cared for. "I'm not much of a decorator," he'd admitted, watching her take in the space. "I was hoping you might help with that." Sarah had moved in gradually, bringing her personal touches to the space while maintaining her shop routine. David never complained about her early mornings or the occasional floral delivery that needed to be stored in their living room. He'd even surprised her by converting a corner of the bedroom into a small workspace where she could do arrangements when she worked from home. Their life together felt natural, unforced. David supported her business in quiet ways, recommending the shop to friends and colleagues, helping her with the books when tax season came around. He never tried to change her or make her feel like she needed to be different. The only mystery was his work. David left early most mornings, dressed in well-tailored suits that spoke of important meetings, and often returned late with an exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. When she asked about his day, he'd give general answers about meetings and deals, then quickly turn the conversation back to her. "Business can be boring," he'd say with a smile. "Tell me about the wedding you're doing this weekend. Did the bride finally decide on the centerpieces?" Sarah had learned not to push. Everyone deserved their privacy, and David's reluctance to discuss work seemed more about protecting their personal time together than hiding anything sinister. Besides, she was happy. Happier than she'd ever been. That's what made the invitation so confusing. Sarah was closing up the shop on a Friday evening, counting the day's receipts and making notes for Monday's flower order, when David appeared in the doorway holding an elegant black envelope. "This came to the office today," he said, his expression unreadable. "It's addressed to both of us." The invitation was printed on heavy cardstock with gold lettering that caught the light. "The Pacific Northwest Business Excellence Awards Gala," it read, followed by details about a black-tie dinner at the city's most exclusive hotel. The price per ticket, listed discreetly at the bottom, made Sarah's eyes widen. $2,000 per person?" she said, looking up at David in bewilderment. "This has to be a mistake. Why would they invite us to something like this?" David was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "I've done some work with companies that will be there. They probably put us on the guest list as a courtesy." "David, we can't afford this," Sarah said gently. "I mean, I appreciate that they thought of us, but $4,000 for dinner? That's more than I make in a good month. What if I told you I wanted to go?" David asked quietly. "But I thought it might be fun to get dressed up and have a fancy dinner together." Sarah looked at him carefully. There was something in his voice, a note she hadn't heard before, not quite pleading, but close. "You really want to do this?" "I do," he said, stepping closer and taking her hands. "Sarah, you work so hard, and you do so much for other people. When was the last time someone did something special for you?" "You do special things for me all the time," she protested. "Dinner at our favorite restaurant isn't the same as this," David said. "I want to see you in a beautiful dress, dancing in a ballroom, being celebrated for the amazing woman you are." The way he said it made her heart flutter, but the practical part of her mind was still spinning. "Even if we could afford it, I don't have anything to wear to something like this. Look at this invitation, David. These people are going to be wearing designer gowns and jewelry that costs more than my car." "Then we'll find you something beautiful," David said simply. "Sarah, trust me on this. I want to share this with you." Something in his tone made her stop arguing. David wasn't the type to make frivolous requests or push for things they couldn't afford. If he wanted to attend this gala, he must have a good reason. "Okay," she said finally. "If it's important to you, then we'll make it work." The relief in David's eyes was immediate and profound, as if she'd just agreed to something far more significant than a dinner. The next day, Sarah found herself in a high-end boutique downtown, feeling completely out of her element. The saleswoman, a perfectly groomed woman named Christine, sized her up within seconds and began pulling dresses that were elegant but not too flashy, beautiful but not attention-grabbing. "You want to look sophisticated," Christine explained, holding up a navy blue gown with subtle beading. "Classic elegance never goes out of style." Sarah tried on several options, each more expensive than the last, until she found a dress that made her feel like herself, but elevated. It was a deep emerald green, simple in cut but luxurious in fabric, with a neckline that was modest but flattering. At $800, it was by far the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever owned. "It's perfect," Christine said as Sarah studied herself in the mirror. "You look like you belong in that dress." David's reaction when she modeled it for him that evening made every penny worth it. His face lit up with genuine admiration, and when he told her she looked stunning, she believed him. But as the day of the gala approached, Sarah's nervousness grew. She'd Googled the event and seen photos from previous years. Women in gowns that probably cost more than her monthly rent, men in custom tuxedos, everyone looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine. These were the city's elite, the business leaders and socialites who appeared on the society pages and donated to galas as a matter of course. What if I say the wrong thing? She asked David the night before. What if I use the wrong fork or don't know how to talk to these people? Just be yourself, David said, pulling her close. That's all you ever need to be. The day of the gala, Sarah spent extra time getting ready, styling her hair in an elegant updo, and applying makeup with more care than usual. The emerald dress fit perfectly, and with her simple pearl earrings, a gift from her grandmother, she felt beautiful and appropriate. David looked handsome in his tuxedo, more polished than she'd ever seen him. But there was something different about his demeanor as they prepared to leave. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He seemed more focused, more alert, like he was preparing for something important. The hotel's entrance was a scene from a movie, a red carpet lined with photographers, valets taking keys to luxury cars, women in glittering gowns posing for pictures. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as their Uber pulled up behind a Bentley. "Are you sure we belong here?" she whispered to David as they walked through the ornate lobby. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," he replied. But she noticed he seemed completely comfortable in these surroundings, nodding to people and navigating the space like he'd been there before. The ballroom was breathtaking, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in white silk, each place setting featuring more silverware than Sarah had ever seen at one meal. The guests were exactly what she'd expected. Polished, elegant, and clearly accustomed to this level of luxury. Their table was near the front, with a clear view of the stage where the evening's presentations would take place. As they found their seats, Sarah noticed the other couples at their table, all impeccably dressed, all speaking in the confident tones of people accustomed to being heard. That's when she met them. Jessica Walsh appeared first, a woman in her 40s with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a silver dress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Her smile was bright and practiced as she introduced herself and her husband, Robert, a real estate developer who immediately launched into a conversation with David about property values. "And you must be Sarah," Jessica said, her eyes quickly cataloging Sarah's dress, jewelry, and general appearance. "How lovely to meet you." Behind Jessica stood two other women, Amanda Foster, a brunette in a red gown that hugged her figure like liquid silk, and Patricia Moore, whose black dress was so simple it had to be designer. Both women smiled politely, but Sarah caught the quick glances they exchanged, the subtle assessment happening beneath the surface pleasantries. "So tell us about yourself, Sarah," Amanda said as they settled into their seats. "What do you do?" "I own a flower shop," Sarah replied, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The three women exchanged another look, this one lasting a fraction of a second longer. "How wonderful," Patricia said, her tone carefully neutral. "That must be so fulfilling, working with your hands." There was something in the way she said "working with your hands" that made Sarah feel like she'd just admitted to manual labor rather than running her own business. "It is," Sarah said firmly. "I love creating beautiful arrangements for people's special moments." "Of course," Jessica agreed quickly. "Small businesses are so important to the community." The word "small" hung in the air like a judgment. As the evening progressed, the conversation continued in this vein. The three women were experts at delivering compliments that felt like criticisms, asking questions that seemed designed to highlight differences rather than find common ground. When Sarah mentioned shopping for her dress at the boutique downtown, Amanda's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, that little place? How resourceful of you to find something so suitable there." When the topic turned to travel, Jessica described her recent trip to Italy with a casual air of someone for whom European vacations were routine. "We have a little place in Tuscany," she mentioned offhandedly. "Nothing fancy, just somewhere to escape when city life gets too overwhelming." Patricia nodded knowingly. "We're thinking of spending next winter in our Aspen house. The city can be so dreary in the cold months." Amanda joined in with stories of their yacht in the Caribbean, their ski chalet in Whistler, their regular trips to New York for shopping and shows. Each story was told with practiced casualness, but Sarah could feel the weight of them, the subtle message that this was normal life for people like them. "What about you and David?" Jessica asked eventually. "Do you have any vacation plans?" Sarah thought about their weekend camping trips to the coast, their hiking adventures in the Columbia River Gorge, their quiet evenings at home cooking dinner together. All wonderful memories, but suddenly they felt small and ordinary in comparison. "We like to explore Oregon," she said. "There are so many beautiful places right here." "How nice that you appreciate local attractions," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The conversation turned to charity work, and again Sarah found herself on the outside looking in. These women served on multiple boards, organized fundraising galas, and spoke casually about donating amounts that made Sarah's head spin. "The Art Museum Gala last month raised over $2 million, Amanda mentioned casually. "Of course, we had to contribute significantly to make it a success." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "I volunteer at the community center sometimes, helping with their flower arrangements for events." "Community service is so important," Jessica agreed, but her tone suggested she was talking about something quaint rather than meaningful. As dinner was served, Sarah found herself growing quieter, more aware of every word she spoke, every gesture she made. She used the correct fork, minded her posture, and tried to participate in conversations about wine vintages and restaurant openings, but she felt like she was performing rather than being herself. The worst moment came during dessert, when Patricia complimented her earrings. "Those are lovely pearls," she said. "They look like real vintage pieces." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "They were my grandmother's." The three women exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't quite decipher, but something in their expressions made her cheeks burn. "How sentimental," Amanda said softly. "It's sweet that you treasure family pieces." Again, the compliment felt like something else entirely. As the evening's program began, Sarah tried to focus on the speakers and award presentations, but her mind kept replaying the conversations from dinner. Every interaction felt like a test she was failing, every response revealing another way she didn't belong in this world. The final straw came during the cocktail hour after dinner. Sarah had excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect herself and escape the subtle psychological pressure of trying to fit in. When she emerged, she overheard Jessica, Amanda, and Patricia talking in hushed tones near the bar. "She seems sweet enough," Jessica was saying. "But really, what does David see in her?" "She's pretty, I'll give her that," Amanda replied, "but so out of place here." "Did you see how she was looking around during dinner? Like she'd never seen a proper place setting before." Patricia laughed softly. "And that dress. I mean, it's fine for what it is, but you can tell it's off the rack. Probably cost less than my shoes." "I just don't understand these relationships," Jessica continued. "Successful men dating so far beneath their station. It never ends well." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. She stood frozen behind a pillar, unable to move, unable to breathe, as their words washed over her like ice water. "Maybe it's a phase," Amanda suggested. "You know how men can be. They think they want something real and authentic, but eventually they realize they need a partner who can actually keep up with their lifestyle." "Poor thing probably thinks it's serious," Patricia added with false sympathy. "Someone should probably warn her before she gets too invested." Their laughter felt like knives in Sarah's chest. Every insecurity she'd been battling all evening crystallized into sharp, painful clarity. They were right. She didn't belong here. She was David's charity case, his walk on the wild side, his experiment in dating outside his social class. Sarah managed to make it back to the table without breaking down, but the rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical responses. David seemed to sense something was wrong, his hand finding hers more frequently, his attention more focused on her than on the other conversations at the table. As the evening wound down and people began making their way toward the exits, Sarah felt emotionally and physically exhausted. She just wanted to go home, take off this expensive dress, and pretend this night had never happened. That's when the announcement came. The evening's host, a distinguished man in an immaculate tuxedo, returned to the podium with barely contained excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's celebration, we have a very special surprise. One of our city's most influential business leaders has agreed to say a few words about the importance of supporting our local business community. Sarah was only half listening, too drained to care about another speech, when the host continued. Please join me in welcoming the CEO and founder of Chen Enterprises, David Chen. The name hit the room like a thunderbolt, and Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. Chen Enterprises, the company whose logo she saw on buildings across the city. The corporation that had revolutionized sustainable technology and employed thousands of people. The business empire that had made its founder one of the youngest billionaires in the country. That was her David. Her quiet, modest boyfriend who helped her with flower arrangements and never talked about work. The applause was thunderous as David stood, straightening his jacket with the confidence of someone who'd addressed countless boardrooms and shareholders' meetings. He walked to the stage like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and suddenly, every interaction Sarah had witnessed tonight made perfect sense. The respectful nods from other guests, the way the hotel staff had treated them, the comfortable way David had navigated this world. It was his world. But as David took the microphone and began to speak, Sarah's shock was interrupted by a new realization. At the table beside her, 3 women sat frozen with expressions of absolute horror. Jessica's face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. Amanda's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Patricia looked like she might faint. Around the room, whispers started immediately. That's David Chen, the billionaire. His company just went public for $12 billion. He's on the Forbes list. And every whisper was another piece of a puzzle clicking into place, revealing a picture that changed everything Sarah thought she knew about her life, her relationship, and the 3 women who had spent the evening making her feel worthless. David's voice carried easily through the room as he began his speech, but Sarah barely heard the words. Her mind was reeling with the implications of what she'd just learned, and her eyes were fixed on 3 women who were clearly wishing they could disappear into the marble floor. The evening was about to take a turn that none of them had seen coming. The transformation was instantaneous and nauseating to watch. Jessica, who moments earlier had dismissed Sarah as beneath David's station, suddenly materialized at her elbow wearing a smile so radiant it could have lit the entire ballroom. Her perfectly manicured hand touched Sarah's arm with feigned familiarity. Sarah, darling, I've been meaning to tell you all evening how absolutely stunning you look. Jessica gushed, her voice dripping with desperation. That dress is so unique and elegant. Where did you say you found such a treasure? The complete reversal was so jarring that Sarah almost laughed. This was the same woman who had spent the entire dinner making subtle digs about her background and belongings. Amanda appeared on Sarah's other side, practically vibrating with nervous energy. I hope we didn't give you the wrong impression earlier. We were just trying to be welcoming, woman to woman, you understand. Her laugh was shrill and artificial, nothing like the cold amusement Sarah had heard in the bathroom. Patricia hovered nearby, wringing her hands like a guilty child caught stealing cookies. Her earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the frantic energy of someone calculating how much damage control was needed. David's speech continued from the stage, his voice warm and genuine as he spoke about supporting local businesses and the importance of authentic relationships in building strong communities. But Sarah barely heard the words. She was too busy watching 3 women who had made her feel invisible suddenly treating her like the most important person at the gala. We absolutely must have lunch next week, Jessica insisted, her grip on Sarah's arm tightening slightly. I know this wonderful little committee that organizes fundraisers for local entrepreneurs. Your perspective would be invaluable. The word perspective was carefully chosen, a far cry from their earlier dismissive comments about her small business and quaint community work. For a moment, Sarah felt the intoxicating pull of revenge. The power was right there, waiting for her to use it. She could make these women squirm, could give them a taste of the humiliation they had so casually dished out. She could smile sweetly and remind them of every cutting remark, every condescending comment, every moment they had made her feel less than. But, as she looked at their desperate faces, she felt something unexpected. Pity. These women lived in a world where worth was measured by bank accounts and social connections. Their kindness was conditional, their friendships transactional. They had to constantly perform and calculate to maintain their status, never knowing if people liked them for who they were or what they could provide. "Thank you for the invitation," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady and dignified. "But I'm quite happy with my current commitments." The refusal hung in the air like a judgment. Jessica's smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. Of course, she stammered. "Perhaps another time when your schedule opens up." Around the room, other guests had begun approaching their table. Men who had barely acknowledged Sarah's existence earlier now wanted to introduce themselves to David's partner. Women who had looked through her were suddenly interested in hearing about her flower shop, her background, her opinions on everything from local politics to charitable causes. The attention felt overwhelming and artificial. These people weren't seeing her any differently than they had an hour ago. The only thing that had changed was their knowledge of David's identity, and suddenly she was worthy of their respect. David finished his speech to thunderous applause and made his way back to their table, accepting congratulations and handshakes along the way. When he reached Sarah, his arm slipped protectively around her waist, and she felt some of the evening's tension begin to ease. Jessica, Amanda, and Patricia immediately began fawning over him, praising his speech and his company's charitable initiatives. Their husbands appeared as if summoned, eager to discuss business opportunities and partnerships. But David's responses were coolly polite, professional, but distant. "Thank you," he said simply to their compliments, his attention focused entirely on Sarah. "Are you ready to go home?" The question was asked quietly, meant only for her, but it carried clearly to the three women who had spent the evening making her feel unwelcome. The message was clear. Sarah's comfort mattered more to him than any networking opportunity or social obligation. As they prepared to leave, the same people who had looked past Sarah earlier now watched with newfound respect. The valet, who had barely glanced at her when they arrived, now held doors and offered assistance with the deference reserved for VIPs. Jessica made one last desperate attempt as they walked toward the exit. "David, you simply must bring Sarah to our charity auction next month. We'd be honored to have you both as our guests." David paused, his hand finding Sarah's. "I appreciate the invitation, but we prefer to choose our events carefully. We support causes that align with our values." The subtle rejection was delivered with perfect politeness, but its meaning was unmistakable. Jessica's face flushed as she realized she had been dismissed, not just by David, but by the couple together. In the car, the silence was comfortable but heavy with unspoken questions. Sarah stared out the window at the city lights, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she found her voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out softer than she'd intended, without accusation, just genuine curiosity about the man she thought she'd known completely. David was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "Because of tonight," he said finally. "Because of the way those women looked at you once they knew who I was." Sarah turned to study his profile in the dim light from the dashboard. "What do you mean? Do you know how rare it is to be loved for who you are, rather than what you have?" David's voice was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "When I met you, you didn't Google me or ask about my portfolio. You laughed at my terrible jokes and let me help you carry flowers. You made me feel human." The words made Sarah's heart ache with understanding. In his world, everyone wanted something: access, money, status, connections. But she had loved him when she thought he was just a businessman who worked long hours. She had loved him for his quiet strength, his terrible puns, his way of listening to her stories about difficult customers as if they were the most important things in the world. "I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I could provide," David continued. "When I met you, you didn't care that I could afford expensive restaurants or luxury vacations. You were happy with our hiking trips and home-cooked dinners. You valued my time and attention, not my bank account." Sarah reached over and took his hand. "I'm still that person," she said firmly. "This doesn't change how I feel about you." "I know," David replied, squeezing her fingers, "but it might change how the world treats us." Tonight was just a preview. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah realized that the evening had taught her something profound about herself. Those women's cruelty had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. Their approval had never been necessary for her worth, and their sudden, desperate friendship was meaningless. "I'm proud of what you've built," she told David as they sat in the car, neither ready to end this conversation. "But I'm also proud of who you are when you're just mine. The man who brings me coffee and listens to my stories about wedding arrangements." David turned to face her fully. "And I'm proud of the woman who stands up for what she believes in, who treats everyone with kindness regardless of their status, who builds something beautiful with her own hands every single day." The experience had revealed the shallow nature of the world they'd stepped into tonight, where kindness was conditional and respect was transactional. But it had also shown Sarah that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars or designer gowns. It was measured in authentic connections, in being loved for who you truly are, in the strength to remain kind even when others weren't. David was still the man who helped her arrange flowers, who fell asleep reading on Sunday afternoons, who made her laugh until her sides hurt. The only difference now was that she understood why he sometimes took late-night business calls, and why certain restaurants always seemed to have a table available when he called. The money hadn't changed him, and it wouldn't change them. What they had was built on something far more valuable than wealth: genuine love, mutual respect, and the rare gift of being completely known and accepted by another person. As they walked toward their front door, Sarah felt lighter than she had all evening. Tomorrow she would return to her flower shop, to her real life, to the work that brought her joy. And David would continue building his empire, but he would still come home to her with stories about his day and terrible jokes that made her roll her eyes and smile. The evening had changed everything and nothing at all. The world might treat them differently now, but what mattered most remained exactly the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.